My name is Michael Thompson from Copperleaf Financial here in Williston, Vermont. I'm a partner and senior wealth advisor here on our crew. And today I'm really excited to have my guest, Will Belongia, the executive director of the Vermont Community Loan Fund. I'm so excited to be able to share with you guys the story of VCLF and what they're all about. Amazing things, doing amazing things for the community. As a reminder, we're recording this session as we record all our sessions. It will be posted on our website so you can review it afterwards if you choose to. We also will set aside time at the end for questions. If you simply enter your question in either the chat feature or the Q&A feature, we'll get to questions along the way. Feel free to ask questions as we go, but we will be setting aside a little bit of time at the end for questions. So by way of introduction, Will grew up in Arlington, Vermont, I just learned, which is super exciting. Will has been on board with the Vermont Community Loan Fund for almost 30 years. And since 2004, he's been the executive director and leading the charge and leading the inspired team at VCLF. Today, we're going to be talking about how VCLF works and what it's all about. Will is a graduate of Notre Dame with a bachelor's degree in economics and got an MBA from the University of Vermont, and is deeply involved in community engagement, community finance across Vermont in a number of different organizations. He's been on the board for a number of important organizations across the state. But Will, let's talk about VCLF. And I have learned over getting to know you over time, a little bit about the history of VCLF, which I think is fascinating. But the first thing I think is I understand that VCLF is not an entity that's unique to Vermont, but is sort of part of a group of organizations across the country. I think you've told me they're called CDFIs. Tell us a little bit about that. So what's the structure of VCLF and what is a CDFI?
Great. Well, thank you, Michael, for having me here with you and with everyone who's listening in. I do appreciate it. And as Michael said, I've been at the Loan Fund for a long time. And one of the interesting things I've always said is people ask me to talk about the Loan Fund, and I can get a little long-winded because I do love what we do and how we do it, and it still excites me today. But yeah, let me give you a little kind of background both of VCLF and the broader kind of types of organization called a community development financial institution. CDFI, which is which is the acronym coined by the federal government, as they love to coin things that are very specific. But really, there are over 1,000 CDFIs around the country. They are in general, or their commonality around them is that they are mission-driven financial institutions that take a market-based approach to supporting economically disadvantaged communities. They share a common goal of really expanding economic opportunity in low-income and low-wealth communities by providing access to capital, to financial products, to financial services. They can be credit unions, venture capital funds, nonprofit revolving loan funds like VCLF. They come in different shapes and sizes, but that common mission-driven goal is what makes them CDFIs. So really, on that vein, the Vermont Community Loan Fund is a mission-driven, community-focused alternative lender. We get loan capital into the hands of entrepreneurs and organizations who are unserved or underserved by traditional lenders. We finance businesses and organizations that help lower income, lower wealth Vermonters access safe, affordable homes, quality jobs, quality early care and learning, and other essential community services like healthcare, the arts. Our mission really is to create opportunities that lead to healthy communities and financial stability for all Vermonters.
Mhm.
To that end, since our inception, we started up in 1987, so almost 35 years ago.
Mhm.
We've loaned over 115 million throughout Vermont to create and helped create or preserve jobs for over 6,800 Vermonters.
Nice.
We've built or rehabilitated over 4,300 homes for families and couples and individuals.
Yep.
We created or preserved quality childcare, early care and learning for over 4,200 children and their families.
Yep.
And supported organizations that support hundreds of thousands of Vermonters.
Mhm.
So, that's the kind of the who we are and what we do are
Mhm.
not exactly what we do. We'll get into that. But I didn't know, I'd love to share, Michael, with you. I know we touched on this last month, but I'd love to share with folks kind of how the loan fund came to be.
Yes.
I think the origin story, I love origin stories of, I like knowing how and why things came to be, because I think they really do create, can create long-lasting reasons of an organization's growth and development. So
I absolutely want to hear that, and I think it's a great story, and it actually has some connections and some roots that are back to organizations that are important to us and that we have some connections to too. So, yeah, please tell us about briefly the origin story of VCLF.
So back in the mid '80s, there was a picnic table. There was a picnic table outside during lunch of a conference at Goddard College.
Yeah.
The conference was around divesting from companies that were invested in and supporting with those investments the apartheid government in South Africa.
Yep.
And so it was a conference around divestiture. But this group of people during lunch one day around a picnic table, and they're all folks, I'm sure if I listed out the names, many of us would still know them. They're still around working really hard to help Vermonters really help Vermonters in all ways. But this group of folks got together and thought through, is it just enough to tell people to divest? Can we tell people how to invest? And can we create a structure that would enable them to do it?
Mm-hmm.
That was the thought around that picnic table. They got some philanthropic support to do a study and model something out. And the germ of that became, in 1987, the Vermont Community Loan Fund. And to begin with, the fund started to react to what was then and is today a crisis in affordable housing.
Yep.
We are still there today, but even back in the mid '80s, there was a huge issue around the development of affordable housing and housing in general in Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the first thing that the loan fund started to invest in. But let me tell you, some of the first investors into the fund mm-hmm. were faith-based groups. Mm-hmm. At the time in the mid '80s, and so faith-based groups like the Sisters of Mercy in Burlington, mm-hmm. Like the Episcopal Diocese, mm-hmm. like the UCC, the churches of the UCC, and some of the congregations within the UCC throughout Vermont. They were some of the beginning investors. And the reason why is around the country, faith-based groups, we were the drivers of socially responsible investing. Yep. And so one of the things I laugh about, and I tell this story a lot because it is something that I think in the 80s and 90s that faith-based groups kind of used but we talked with a lot of, for example, the Sisters of Mercy, And one of the things that they would say to us in different ways, but the nuts and bolts was, here's our money, do good things with it, pay it back.
Right.
We can't lose it, but we want you to do good things with it.
Yep.
We want you, the loan fund, they wanted the loan fund and organizations and CDFIs like us to be an extension of their mission. And that is the core of mission-based investing.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that I love this story because it resonates so well with how we approach sustainable investing and how I've been involved for decades, for the last few decades, in the evolution of socially responsible investing and how it's evolved to ESG, and now we think of it as sustainable investing. But yeah, the ties are pretty amazing. But anyway, carry on. So primarily faith-based organizations, and I assume other interested individuals provided capital, which you guys were then able to loan out to do good works. And primarily I'm hearing around affordable housing, and then childcare or early care came into it at some point. And I understand there's some new initiatives which we'll hopefully touch on coming along. But is that right? Do I kind of get the picture there?
Yeah, so the loan fund, we started raising capital from a variety of sources. So today, while we still have capital from faith-based groups, it's not as dominating as our they used to be one of the larger ones. Now they're one of the smaller ones, only because individual, as you've seen, Michael, and the community of your community, individuals have had a growing desire to use their wealth in ways that that coincide with their own values, ways that they can drive their values forward in the world through their investments. And so we've seen here at the Loan Fund an incredible growth in individual investment in the fund. To date, individuals and families and couples are our largest source of capital. They make up about 53% of the dollars. So we have about 34 million in borrowed money from investors that we've borrowed from them. About 53%, a little over 53% of that comes from families and individuals and couples. It's made up of about 650 investments from about 450 investors. And of those 450 investors, just under 90%, maybe 88% are in numbers of that 450 investors are individuals or couples. So we are, our investments have more and more, as we've grown, come from some of those mission-based and values-based investors that we're seeing grow a growth in here in the United States and in Vermont. But yes, we lend to affordable housing projects, so mostly nonprofit affordable housing developers. We lend to early care and learning, both home-based and center-based childcare centers and other early learning centers. We lend to small businesses. Pretty wide range of small businesses, though, because we operate in Vermont, a large part of them are in the food, farm, and forest sector. Large part of them. That's the nature, in some ways, the nature of our rural economies here in Vermont. And then to other nonprofits. And then we lend to other nonprofit service providers that are providing services to mostly low-income, low-wealth Vermonters and those that have access issues. So many in some of our small rural communities.
Can you give some examples? I'm thinking about the impact of some of the loans that VCLF has made. Can you give us any examples in any of those areas, affordable housing or early care or others, that people can kind of wrap their arms around? Yeah,
there's so here's I'll give you a couple. One in our housing. One of the one segment of housing that that we have in Vermont that is affordable to those who are of lower income or lower wealth are manufactured housing parks. And one of the things that we've seen growing nationally and somewhat in Vermont as well is the owners of those within those parks. We'll call them tenants, but they own their home and typically lease the lot that they're
right.
But many of those parks are for profit. They're owned by an individual, and there is a growing desire to try to have the folks that live there control and own that. So whether it's a cooperative structure or they create a nonprofit that can kind of manage and provide voice to those folks living there. So there's a big one in Colchester that we just helped finance. It was I want to say close to a $13 million project.
Nice.
It was 235 families.
Wow.
And those families are going to purchase it from the current owner who's looking to sell, create a cooperative so that they can control it, their homes. And the loan fund is coming in. We're partnering with, I believe, a bank is going to buy a bond that's going to do a good piece of this. But then the Vermont Community Loan Fund and the Co-op Fund of New England are partnering for about a $3 million subordinate piece underneath the bank's bond financing that's going on. And that's typical in affordable housing. The loan fund will typically fill in gaps in kind of subordinate positions to a bank. And it makes the whole deal work, and it makes the financing work, and it is able to lever in that bank who wants to come in with 8 of 13 or 10 of 13, but not the other 3. And it's helping folks. I think the families, the majority of them make under 50% of Chittenden County median income. So this is critical housing in Chittenden County, and as we all know, it's Chittenden County is housing is hard to find. Yes. And so this was an important thing to protect and for the tenants to control.
That sounds like a big win and a much more sustainable solution for those soon to be owners in that cooperative structure. I know a lot of our clients have expressed a desire to help with in areas around what I might think of as racial justice. And is that something that the Community Loan Fund is able to focus on at all?
Yeah. As a justice-based organization, so the Loan Fund has always talked through its 35-year history of social and economic justice, and wanting to provide, as I talked about CDFIs and about the Loan Fund, wanting to expand economic opportunity for disadvantaged, low wealth folks that have trouble, whether it's because of generational or traditional low wealth. Have had trouble accessing capital and accessing other things, but accessing capital in order to start a business, expand a business, whether to find shelter, whether to afford that shelter, all sorts of things that that many folks can take for granted, but that for some it is an incredible challenge. Yep. So and I guess as a justice organization, the events of last summer with the outcry of injustice that we heard, that resonated with the loan fund staff and the board.
Mhm.
And we looked really hard at, are we achieving the mission that we set out for ourselves?
Mhm.
That's you know, every organization and nonprofit thinks about this,
Mhm.
but we really had to, everyone thinks about it, but we really did spend a lot of time soul searching on this. And we've had tremendous success in lending to women-owned businesses, creating shelter and affordable shelter for families and couples and individuals,
Mhm.
you know, providing childcare and to families that really needed it in order to, you know, be able to go to work and make a living wage and support their families.
Yep.
But the vast majority of our borrowers are not able to secure credit from banks, or not be able to secure all the credit that they might need to implement their vision. But one of the key populations that we did feel we were not addressing as well as we could were households and were diverse households and diverse communities.
Yep.
And so we made a hard look at why that was, and what we could do better. And so we talked with a lot of people. We did a survey of entrepreneurs around what obstacles they may have to accessing credit, and we actually have drafted up a new loan program that we are excited about, that we will end up launching in October.
Mhm.
That is, we're tentatively calling it our Justice Forward Fund.
Mhm.
It's really designed to provide capital to low or no net worth folks with low or no net worth. In fact, one of the interesting things is one of the requirements is that folks have to have a net worth under $36,150. So in some ways, it's putting lending on its head. We're not looking for to lend to high net worth individuals. We want to lend. You need to have a low net worth. We're looking at interest rates that range, that are under 3% and that could get to 0%.
Wow.
In fact, the rates will go down as your net worth goes down.
Wow.
The goal is to not be extractive of wealth. We're looking at changing some other policies that would allow us to take some higher risk. Policies around lending that would allow us to take some higher risk on these loans and allow them to, and the focus is on people and communities of color, of the BIPOC communities, our new Americans, folks that have generationally and traditionally been denied the ability to generate wealth in our country. This will be you know, these loans will probably be anywhere from 1,000 to 40,000 in size.
Yep.
And we've been excited because so much interest in this. We've gotten some philanthropic support that allows us, one, to take some risk on this. And then the loan fund made its own decision to take some risk on this, to use its own net worth, right? So you know, its own net worth, and protect you know, the fund and dedicate some of our own net worth to this product. in case the losses are higher
Yep.
than normal. So I'm excited about it.
That's a sounds like a bold and exciting initiative, and congratulations on taking it on, and good luck with it. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about how investors can participate. And as an investor, I understand that I essentially loan money to VCLF that you then loan out. So tell us a little bit, walk us through in simple terms how that works. I understand it's in the form of notes. So, tell as an investor that's never participated in the loan fund, what do I need to do and how does it work?
Great. Yeah, thanks. So like I said, we have about 650 individual investments from about 450 investors. While we have just around $52 million in assets under management, about 34 to 35 million of it comes from investors that lend us money.
Mm-hmm.
They lend us money into it. We pool all that capital. Mm-hmm. And lend it out to the purposes as we discussed. The difference between that 35 million and the 52 is our own equity.
Yep.
And that equity does a number of things. We lend it out. It is reserved for any loan losses. Mm-hmm. And ultimately it's what protects investors.
Yep.
Any losses from the fund would be borne by that equity. It's about a 30%. We're at about 30% equity. So, and we have always been able to repay investors. 100% of our investments have been repaid to investors. We've never lost any investors' dollars. Mm-hmm. So, investors really, the nuts and bolts are, as you had mentioned just previously, it's a note product, which mm-hmm. for what that means is it's a pretty simple promissory note and loan agreement that we issue. So the investor, and we call them investors because it's just the word that people seem to use. The investors are lending us money. It's not like an equity investment. They're lending us money. Yep. It's a promissory note and loan agreement. The promissory note is one page. I think it says the investor lends us this money and for this length of time and at this rate, and at the end of that time, we'll pay it back. It's
very brief. I'm blown away at how brief that agreement is.
Yeah, and then there's a loan agreement, which is a couple pages that just details kind of how it would all work. Mm-hmm. But so investors usually lend us money for anything. Our most common product is our term product. It's our yep. term note. Yep. Terms are anywhere from typically 1 to 10 years. We do have some longer terms. We would borrow the money for longer, but mm-hmm. the most common is between 1 and 10 years. Yep. We pay an interest rate to investors based upon how long they're leaving it and lending it to us. So those rates are ranging. They're gonna much like our marketplace CD markets, rates are pretty low, but we are probably higher than bank CDs at this point. I think we're ranging on our term product from 0.5, so 0.5% to 2.5%. If you leave it for 10 years. So 1 year is 0.5, 10 years 2.5, and it's a pretty linear curve up. Yep. The longer you leave it, the higher the interest rate.
I was going to say your rates are actually really competitive when you look at bank CD rates these days. And speaking of CDs, for the novice investor or for the investor that's never participated in a note with VCLF or any other note like that, it really is a lot like a CD. You deposit your money for the period of the term. At the end of the term, you get paid back your money. It's not FDIC insured, but it's backed by the full faith and credit, as it were, of VCLF. Mm-hmm. And along the way, you pay interest. Is the interest accrued and paid periodically or at the end of the note?
Either way, whatever the investor wants, we can pay it semi-annually. We could pay it annually. We could pay it at the end of the term. We can even add annual interest to the principal balance of the investment. So we can do a little compounding, a little bit.
Yep, a little bit. And what's and I imagine there's a minimum and probably a maximum, although if I were in your shoes, I might hedge a little bit on the maximum, but
yeah, the minimum is $1,000.
Yep.
Yeah, the max, we actually do have a policy max of 10% of our loan capital.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we don't have any, that's, at roughly, that's probably 5 million, which I would hesitate.
Right.
I probably wouldn't borrow 5 million. I wouldn't do that. That's a little too much risk. So our policy there is probably a little overblown, but we would.
Yep. Now,
our typical individual investor is probably around 20 to 25.
Okay.
But it's a pretty wide range. We have a lot of $1,000 investors and a few larger, right? Like it's probably the bell curve is much more weighted. Like the median is probably, 10, but the average is probably 20, 25.
Yep. And I imagine, and I think we've talked about this in prior conversations, that a lot of those notes simply roll over. People kind of extend to another term, and that's probably appropriate in a lot of cases if people are comfortable with the program and the process, right?
About 92%. This is historically, if I look back 10, 15 years. 92% of our investors, when their loan comes due, ask us to just extend it out for another 1, 3, 5, 7 years.
Yep.
8% we end up saying, "Yep, I need it back for lots of good reasons," and we repay it. Yep.
And I am guessing, although I shouldn't say I'm guessing, I know the answer, but for a lot of programs that investors, our clients may be interested in that are sort of outside the norm of owning stocks or bonds or traditional investments, there are certain requirements in terms of being what's called an accredited investor. But I assume that's not the case with VCLF.
That's right. We're not tied to, you don't need to be accredited to participate. And that's really a function of, because it's a loan, because it's an unsecured loan, because it's just going into a pool. The investor does not take ownership of any of the corpus of the loan fund or have a right to ownership. And so there's not much of the SEC rules that start saying you have to be accredited or unaccredited. We do annually, we submit our prospectus to the Department of Financial Regulation here in Vermont. They look it over just to make sure, and our annual audit goes to them as well. But that's the level of their oversight. They just want to know that, what it is we're doing. Our office is pretty much across the street from them, so I do see them on the street a lot.
I want to remind people that if you have questions, go ahead and post your questions either in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to them either along the way or at the end. Well, I understand there's another way as an investor that I can, within that Vermont allows me to actually have a potentially a tax benefit for the interest. Tell us a little bit about that. And I also understand there may be some restrictions there in terms of the amount that can actually go into that program. So tell us a little bit about how that works.
Sure. So back in the early 90s, the Vermont state legislature passed the Charitable Housing Tax Credit Program. And at the time, and it is still the same today, they allowed a $5 million tax credit pool the credit is actually capped at 150,000. So the liability to the state is about 150,000.
Got it.
But it allows the state will provide a tax credit equal to, they have some calculations on what it is, that would be able to be taken off of your Vermont income tax. So this is, you would need a Vermont income tax liability. It's a credit, not a deduction. So it comes right off the bottom line. It is to right now, I think it's equal to 1.5%. It changes every July 1st. It is 2% below prime rate, as prime rate is published in May. So it could be, the tax credit could be 1.25. I think prime rate's around 3.25. So I think you get a tax credit of 1.25% of your investment. So on a $1,000 investment, you would get they'd round it up, $13 tax credit on your Vermont state income taxes. So you would invest in the Vermont Community Loan Fund at 0%. We wouldn't pay you any interest. And then every year we would send you a statement that you would then include with your Vermont state taxes, and you would be able to get that $13 off of your taxes. We have about $4.6 million of investors' money invested in that program right now. So we have about $350,000 capacity left. So about $350,000 that someone, and then that money, what's interesting about this and the whole purpose of this is to incent investments in affordable housing. That loan from the investor is then dedicated to affordable housing projects. We would lend it into affordable housing projects. And so that works out great for those investors, A, that are interested in the tax credit, or B, that are really interested in the support of affordable housing for lower income, lower wealth Vermonters. That's a pretty attractive both yield, but also purpose and impact.
That is very attractive, and that $5 million that's an annual pool, kind of an annual restriction, or no?
You know, it is. It's actually going to stay. So if you're an investor and you've invested into the program and your investment is 3 years, your investment would be in it for 3 years. Right. So you're getting it for 3 years. Right. So the way that pool goes down is if we repay an investor in that pool, it opens it up for someone else to participate. Yeah. So a good example, we did have an investor that had 100,000 into that program, had been with us for a while, but we just repaid it. So it opened up, someone else can now come in or multiple people, depending on the size and scale. And there's no limit on that program. Like, so I have $1,000 investment that's in the charitable housing tax credit. That's how I know it rounds up to $13. Because, so that's kind of fun. Okay. Good. That's super helpful. There's also another program that I think is less commonly used. That's a deposit note. Tell us a little bit about that. And again, it may not be as attractive as the term notes. The term note, yeah. One of the things that we created, and there's a handful. There's probably maybe 15, maybe 20, 15 to 20 of our investors that invest in us through what we call our cash account. It is a more demand note. It's a lower interest rate. So it's, I think right now, 0.25% is the interest rate, but it allows an investor to both deposit and withdraw money from it at least once a month, if need be. So it's, in some ways, it's if someone isn't quite sure what the immediate future may hold, maybe they're going to go with the loan fund, or they just put it in that just as a temporary, though we've had some investors that are in it, have been in it for a while now. But it's a less useful or less used, but for those investors that use it, it just allows them a little more flexibility if they think they might need this money,
Yep.
you know, in the immediate future.
Yep. Maybe a way for somebody to get their feet wet if
Exactly.
if it's something new for them. Yeah.
Yep.
Are there, so you talked about the charitable, the housing tax credit, the affordable housing tax credit. Are there other ways that as an investor, can I restrict the use of my dollars? If, for example, I'm, keenly interested in racial justice, for example, in your new program, it sounds like that's that's certainly a new loan fund, but as an investor, can I restrict the use of my capital for that particular purpose, or for early care, for example? Or am I required to, other than housing, am I required to simply have it be part of the larger pool, and you guys have the discretion to loan it out as you see fit?
Yeah. So you can. The caveat to that is we want to make sure that that we have the borrowers,
Mhm.
the use of that fund is sufficient, because we don't want investor money sitting.
Yes.
So we don't want. We've done it as you said, in a few instances, the affordable housing.
Mhm.
Because we're pretty confident affordable housing makes up about 45% of the VCLF portfolio.
Mhm.
So we're pretty confident that we can move that money into a project, and into supporting those families with shelter and home. We have a couple others that so we try to keep it broad. So you're right. We have what's called our Next Generation Fund, which is to support early care and learning. So folks can lend and kind of designate it for early care and learning enterprises, if they're really interested in the care of children, and so that's been good. We have enough demand in our early care and learning to be able to make sure that money can be used. The other one we have is our Food, Farm, and Forest fund. So folks can, if they're really interested in working lands and rural economic development here in Vermont, and how we can support kind of that agricultural base and the forestry based economies here in the state. We have enough demand within that sector that we can take investments and designate them into that.
I'm curious about how COVID and sort of the economy over the economy and the whatever we call COVID, how it's impacted all of us over the last couple of years, has had an impact on the fund or not. Have you felt it at all, and in what ways have you felt it, and do you see that changing, or kind of how's that going?
So as we all know, COVID has had a pretty disruptive, has been pretty disruptive in our personal and professional lives, and that's no different than the loan fund. I won't get into all of the issues, but kind of the more direct impacts that VCLF has faced. A couple of things, and they're some of them I expected and some I didn't. The expected really was in 2020, our loan volume was down. As we all knew, we all hunkered down. Many of us hunkered down. So there wasn't a lot of lending activity happening. That was the flip side of that for VCLF is we partnered with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to support the outreach and assistance for a $5 million grant program for women and BIPOC-owned businesses. This was last summer. And we partnered with the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity, the Vermont Commission on Women, the Center for Women in Enterprise, the Association of Africans Living in Vermont, to provide outreach and support to business owners that could get those grants from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. That was a big piece of work. It wasn't lending. It was a little different than we normally did, but I think we all knew back in July was like, people need help right away, right? We were all a little taken aback by the impacts of COVID and the shutdown that we experienced. One of the really fascinating things was the loan portfolio for the Vermont Community Loan Fund did not show any negative effects. Our borrowers have done very well through this. And I think it's a factor of a tremendous amount of state and federal support for all of us, whether it's through the unemployment or through grants or through the Paycheck Protection Program or all of that. And on that note, VCLF became a lender for the Paycheck Protection Program loans.
Wow.
So we actually made 65 Paycheck Protection Program loans. That's, you know, we were really doing it for folks that had trouble doing it with a bank. Like some of the banks and both regionally and nationally and the state banks did incredible volume in that, hundreds and thousands. So 65 is not a big number compared to what other folks were doing.
Sure.
But we realized that there were a lot of folks who struggled with the process. And so we really picked up those 65 entrepreneurs that needed help accessing that program. Perfect thing for the loan fund to do, right? That's what we're here for. How to help people access capital. And so we did that. You know, today our loan volume, we will probably do around 6 to 7 million in loans in 2021. So we did about 2 million in 2020, which was low. 6 million is probably what we target here at the loan fund every year. We should exceed that this year, but 2020 was low. And it really comes down to you know, all of the things that that we read and hear about the Vermont economy. You know, Vermont has seen some really good growth in Chittenden County and some stagnation in some of our rural communities. Many of the programs of the loan fund are designed to how do we support rural economic development in the state, whether it's through our Food, Farm, and Forest Fund. We have a program for working lands, we call it Sprout, for working lands, businesses, startups. We have a trails program to help outdoor recreation businesses and nonprofits that are involved in providing supports and direct service around outdoor rec, which can be some of the most important economic drivers in rural communities. You know, even so we look at those rural communities and know that they're still struggling. And part of it is, and I know Governor Scott has talked about this pretty much since he became governor, which is our population. We do need an inflow of, we do need people.
We need more people.
We just need more people. We have entrepreneurs who have vision and who have energy. We have ideas. We've always had ideas in Vermont. We've always been folks that see entrepreneurship and starting new businesses as a way of creating financial stability for our households. But we would all be better off if we could bring in more diverse folks so that we could have more diverse entrepreneurs and more diverse business types and more ideas and more energy as we grow our all of our economies throughout, all our little micro economies, so that there's more growth in Bennington and Brattleboro and Newport, and not just in Chittenden County and Burlington area.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the hard soul searching that you described, that you and your staff and board have gone through to to create this Justice Forward Fund is really good thinking to help think about ways that that the loan fund can continue to have impact or greater impact in the future, and that's really exciting. Congratulations for taking that on. As we kind of begin to wrap up our session today, I'm wondering if there's what else you see in terms of challenges for the future or opportunities in the future for the loan fund in general, in terms of continuing to have an impact and continuing to work towards your mission.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We've made a concerted effort to invest in is to have more capacity here at the loan fund to provide assistance to businesses. So we staffed up. We added staff to our business resource center. Which we call it a business resource center. We do have 3 folks that work in it. So yeah, I'm going to call it a center. It's a center. But it's really our business, providing business assistance to entrepreneurs and to startup and to businesses and to ongoing and expanding and growing businesses. We found in many of the sectors that we work, whether it's agriculture, working lands, whether it's early care and learning, that the money is may not always be all that the entrepreneur needs. They may need help on HR issues or cash management or accounting or succession planning or just business executive skills. There's a lot of assistance, and there's a lot of organizations in the state that provide that. But it's hard when you're an entrepreneur and you're really good at, well, let me just think, you're a childcare provider and you're really good at teaching young children, right? You're really good at providing early care. But maybe you're not great with accounts payable and accounts receivable and those kinds of things. And so you need some assistance, and it may not be VCLF providing it. It may be us finding the resources for that can support that business. But it could be us providing it. We've got 3 people. We have a center. It could be simple things as how to use an iPhone to take good pictures for a website, right? How to just how to set up. It's just little knowledge that some business owners just aren't gonna. That's not what they're. Business owners have to be a jack of all trades, but they need to be really good at their business, right? It's some of those other pieces that a little help can go a long way. And so we've really started working on that here at the Loan Fund.
Yep. That's exciting, Will. So are there other things that we haven't talked about today that you feel like are important for our clients and for the investing community to know and understand or to think about within the context of Vermont Community Loan Fund? And I'll throw one out, a little tidbit out before you answer that question, which is one of the things that I sometimes remind clients about or talk about is actually using dollars already designated for charity, like within a donor advised fund or a private foundation, to make program related investments and make loans. So actually participate in notes through VCLF to kind of expand that charitable strategy. Are there other things though that you think might be important for investors to know that we haven't talked about yet?
I'll take this a little broad. If folks are interested in how they can put their money to work to achieve their values, whether their value is, helping low wealth Vermonters, or whether it's place-based, they want it to be local, there are various ways to do it in Vermont. It's one of the wonderful things about Vermont is there are opportunities to participate. Sometimes it's just knowing what they are. So I think the loan fund in some ways can be a toe in the water. It can be the start, right? It's fairly simple. If you go to investinvermont.org, that's our website. There's ways to do it. It's it's a toe in the water. But there are some other things. If that that may be gets you part of the way of what you want to achieve as an investor with your capital, you may want to go to something like the White River Investment Club, which is a group of folks, and they have a really good process and a really good structure and infrastructure of decision making and community of investors who are looking at some direct investments, actually sometimes equity into businesses and startups and some very cool kind of things. Or you could go to the Flexible Capital Fund, which is here in Vermont, that is, I think, for accredited investors. They're a limited liability, an LC3, a limited liability, low profit, limited liability corporation. I guess. Right. But they're doing, around both energy and working lands, some deep investments into Vermont businesses, and that's a different way of doing it. There are other ways, and there's ways to seek those other ways that you can participate in different ways. And I would encourage everyone to think through what feels right and what feels appropriate for themselves.
Absolutely. And always a little plug for us, always make sure it's within concert of with your overall wealth plan and financial plan. Right. We're here to help with that. So well, we're at the end of our time. We don't have any questions, Will, which means hopefully we've done a good job of covering the topic. If people have an interest in investing in the Vermont Community Loan Fund, we certainly can facilitate that process, or they can go directly to you. We like to help our clients where we can with that process. And your website is how would they find your website?
So it is investinvermont.org.
Yep.
Investinvermont.org. And you can also give us a call. And I can I'll give you the number. It's 802-223-1448. Give us a call as well. Right down
the hill from me. So I pass you guys all the time.
Ask Michael to stop by.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Will, for joining us today. Thank you, folks, for participating and joining our session today.
Yes.
Hope you found it helpful. If you want to access the recording, we'll have this posted on our website within the next couple of days. And we look forward to our sessions next month and throughout the year. So thanks again, Will, and good luck with your new initiative and everything at VCLF.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you.